Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez adjusted her helmet one final time as she walked toward her A-10 Thunderbolt II. The massive aircraft sat on the tarmac like a sleeping giant, its twin engines and distinctive straight wings marking it as one of the most feared close air support planes in the military. The morning sun cast long shadows across Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan, and the familiar smell of jet fuel mixed with desert dust filled her nostrils. She had earned her call sign, Phoenix, during her first deployment 3 years ago when she had to make an emergency landing after taking heavy ground fire. Her plane had been so damaged that maintenance crews called it a miracle she made it back alive. Like the mythical bird, she had risen from what should have been ashes. The name stuck, though not everyone took it seriously. Sarah was one of only a handful of female A-10 pilots in the entire Air Force, and she had fought harder than most to prove she belonged in the cockpit. Every mission was a chance to show that she could handle the pressure, the danger, and the responsibility of providing close air support to ground troops who depended on her precision and timing to stay alive. Today's briefing had been routine. Intelligence reports suggested minimal enemy activity in the target area, a small valley in eastern Afghanistan, where a joint special operations team would be conducting a search and seizure mission. Her job was to provide overwatch, circling high above in case the ground team needed her 30mm cannon or her arsenal of missiles and bombs. As she completed her pre-flight checklist, Sarah noticed a group of soldiers loading into helicopters on the other side of the airfield. Even from a distance, she could tell they were special operations by their gear and the way they moved with quiet efficiency. These were likely the SEALs she would be supporting today. Her radio crackled to life. "Phoenix, this is ground control. You have priority clearance for takeoff. Weather looks good. Minimal wind." "Copy that, ground control. Phoenix ready for departure." Sarah's voice was steady and professional as she started her engines. The twin turbofans spun up with their characteristic whine, and she felt the familiar vibration through her seat. She had memorized every detail of today's mission during the briefing. The target was a compound suspected of housing a high-value Taliban commander who had been coordinating attacks on supply convoys. The SEAL team would fast rope from helicopters under cover of darkness, secure the compound, and extract any valuable intelligence or personnel. Sarah's A-10 would arrive on station 30 minutes before the ground team to scout the area and remain overhead throughout the operation. As she taxied toward the runway, Sarah thought about the comments she had overheard in the briefing room. One of the SEAL team members, a tall man with intense eyes and lieutenant's bars, had been discussing the air support with his team leader. When he heard her call sign mentioned, he had rolled his eyes and muttered something about fancy names and rookie pilots. His teammates had chuckled, but Sarah had caught every word. It wasn't the first time she had encountered skepticism from ground troops, especially from elite units like the SEALs. They were used to working with experienced male pilots who had proven themselves in combat multiple times. To them, she was an unknown quantity with a flashy call sign who might crack under pressure when lives were on the line. Sarah understood their concern, even if it frustrated her. In their world, trust was earned through shared danger and proven competence. They didn't know that she had flown over 60 combat missions, that she had saved countless lives with precisely placed ordnance, or that her fellow pilots respected her skills enough to request her for their most dangerous assignments. "Phoenix, you are cleared for takeoff. Wind calm, visibility unlimited. Have a safe flight." The tower controller's voice brought her back to the present. "Roger, cleared for takeoff. Phoenix departing Bagram." She pushed the throttles forward and felt the A-10's powerful engines pull her down the runway. The aircraft accelerated steadily, and she pulled back on the stick as the nose wheel lifted off the ground. Within seconds, she was airborne and climbing into the clear Afghan sky. The flight to the target area would take 45 minutes, giving her time to review the mission parameters and study the terrain. She switched to the tactical frequency and checked in with the SEAL team's helicopter flight. "Razor 11, this is Phoenix. I'm en route to provide overwatch for your operation. Estimate on station in 40 minutes. The response came from the lead helicopter pilot, his voice professional but lacking warmth. "Copy, Phoenix. Be advised, Razor team leader requests you maintain high altitude and stay clear unless specifically called in. They prefer to keep things quiet. Sarah almost smiled at that. The SEAL team leader was clearly the lieutenant who had rolled his eyes at her call sign. He was making it clear that he didn't want some untested pilot buzzing around his area of operations, potentially compromising his team's stealth approach. Understood, Razor 1-1. I'll maintain Angels 15 and keep my mouth shut unless you need me. Her response was professional, but she allowed just a hint of confidence to creep into her voice. As she flew toward the mountains, Sarah reflected on the challenge ahead. She would have to prove herself, not just as a pilot, but as a warrior worthy of the trust these elite soldiers placed in their air support. The lieutenant's skepticism would either be justified or proven wrong within the next few hours. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. In the distance, she could see the rugged terrain where the operation would take place. It was hostile territory, filled with hidden dangers and enemy fighters who would not hesitate to kill any American they encountered. Sarah checked her weapons, systems one more time, and settled in for what she hoped would be a routine Overwatch mission. She had no way of knowing that within hours, she would face the most challenging situation of her career, and that the skeptical SEAL lieutenant would learn to see her in an entirely different light. Lieutenant Jake "Hammer" Thompson checked his gear one final time as the helicopter approached the target area. His rifle was clean and loaded, his night vision goggles were secure, and his radio was tuned to the correct frequencies. As the team leader for this 8-man SEAL squad, he carried the responsibility for every man under his command, and tonight's mission was particularly important. The intelligence they were after could save hundreds of American lives if they could locate and extract it successfully. The Taliban commander they were hunting had been planning a series of coordinated attacks on NATO supply routes, and his communications network held the keys to preventing a major offensive. Jake had been leading SEAL teams for 5 years, since graduating from the Naval Academy and completing the grueling training that turned ordinary sailors into elite warriors. He had earned his call sign "Hammer" during a firefight in Iraq, when he had used his rifle butt to break down a door after running out of breaching charges. His direct, no-nonsense approach to combat had served him well in dozens of operations. The A-10 helicopter pilot's voice crackled through his headset. 2 minutes to target. Weather is clear. No visible ground activity. Jake keyed his radio to address his team. Listen up. We fast rope to the compound, secure the perimeter, and search for intelligence materials. Intel says the target may still be on site, so stay sharp. We have air support overhead if needed, but let's keep this quiet and clean. One of his team members, Petty Officer Rodriguez, glanced at him. What's our air support, Lieutenant? A-10 with call sign Phoenix, Jake replied, trying to keep the skepticism out of his voice. Pilot's probably some academy grad with more flight hours in simulators than actual combat time. He had heard the stories about pilots who earned flashy call signs during training exercises but had never faced real enemy fire. The name Phoenix sounded like something from a video game rather than a serious military operation. Jake preferred working with pilots he knew and trusted, veterans who understood the split-second timing required for close air support. The helicopter flared as they reached the compound, and Jake could see the target building through his night vision goggles. It was a typical Afghan structure, flat-roofed and surrounded by high walls. Intelligence photos showed multiple rooms and outbuildings where their target could be hiding sensitive materials. 30 seconds, the pilot announced. Jake stood and hooked his fast rope gloves to the thick rope that would carry him to the ground. His team lined up behind him, each man focused and ready. They had rehearsed this type of operation hundreds of times, but every mission brought new variables and dangers. The helicopter settled into a hover 30 feet above the compound courtyard. Jake grabbed the rope and slid down quickly, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with a soft thud. Within seconds, all 8 SEALs were on the ground and moving to their assigned positions. Overwatch, this is Hammer. We're on the ground and beginning our approach. Jake spoke quietly into his radio as his team spread out around the compound walls. High above, Sarah Martinez acknowledged the transmission. Copy, Hammer. I have you in sight. All clear from up here. No movement detected outside your immediate area. Jake barely registered her response as he focused on the mission. His team moved with practiced silence, using hand signals to communicate as they approached the main building. The intelligence briefing had indicated minimal security, but Jake never trusted intelligence completely. Too many good men had died, because someone in an air-conditioned office had guessed wrong about enemy strength. The first sign of trouble came when Rodriguez, who was covering the rear entrance, spotted movement in one of the outbuildings. "Hammer, I've got 2 military-age males moving toward the back of the compound. They're armed." Jake cursed silently. The intelligence had been wrong again. This wasn't going to be a simple search and seizure after all. "Copy that. Jenkins, Wilson, secure the front. Rodriguez and Martinez contain the rear. Everyone else were going in hard and fast." The SEAL team moved with deadly efficiency as their plan shifted from stealth to direct action. Jake's experience told him that once they had been detected, speed and overwhelming force were their best options for completing the mission and getting home alive. The sound of gunfire erupted from the rear of the compound as Rodriguez engaged the 2 armed men. Within seconds, the entire area was alive with muzzle flashes and the crack of rifle rounds. Jake could hear shouting in Dari from inside the main building, indicating that more enemies were present than intelligence had suggested. "Contact rear. Multiple hostiles." Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with the controlled urgency of a professional under fire. Jake and his assault team breached the front door of the main building just as more gunfire erupted from windows on the second floor. They were walking into a prepared defensive position, exactly the kind of situation that could turn a routine mission into a disaster. "Hammer, this is Phoenix. I can see muzzle flashes from multiple positions around your location. Looks like you've got at least a dozen hostiles, maybe more." Sarah's voice was calm and professional as she watched the firefight develop below. Jake was too busy returning fire to respond immediately. His team was pinned down in the courtyard while enemies fired from elevated positions in the building and surrounding walls. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, and he could see that they might need to call for extraction sooner than planned. "Phoenix, stand by for possible close air support. We're taking heavy fire from multiple directions." Jake's training kicked in as he began calculating how to use the A-10's firepower without endangering his own men. Above them, Sarah was already analyzing the tactical picture and preparing her weapon systems. She could see the SEAL team's positions clearly through her targeting systems, and she was identifying potential targets for her 30mm cannon. The skeptical lieutenant was about to discover what kind of pilot he was really dealing with. The firefight intensified as more enemy fighters emerged from hiding positions throughout the compound. Jake realized that this wasn't just a safe house they had stumbled into, but a major Taliban stronghold with prepared defenses and a significant number of fighters. His team was outnumbered and outgunned, trapped in an increasingly desperate situation that would require all their training and courage to survive. The situation on the ground was deteriorating fast. Jake's team was taking fire from 3 different directions, and he could see that they were outnumbered at least 3-1. What was supposed to be a quick intelligence-gathering mission had turned into a full-scale firefight with a well-prepared enemy force. "Martinez is hit." Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio chatter. "He's alive but needs immediate medical attention." Jake felt his stomach drop. Petty Officer Martinez was one of his most experienced operators, and losing him now would make an already difficult situation nearly impossible. The young medic they had tagged was pinned down behind a low wall, unable to reach the wounded SEAL. Enemy fire was coming from the main building's windows, from positions along the compound walls, and from at least 2 outbuildings. The Taliban fighters had clearly been expecting them, or at least had prepared defensive positions for exactly this type of raid. "Hammer, this is Phoenix." Sarah's voice came through his headset with professional calm. "I can see your situation. Down there. You need immediate close air support, and you need it now." Jake was crouched behind a concrete barrier, rounds cracking overhead as he tried to assess his team's positions. His natural instinct was to handle the situation with his own men, but his training and experience told him that pride could get his entire team killed. Phoenix, we need immediate fire support on the main building, second floor windows. Multiple hostiles with automatic weapons. Jake's voice was steady despite the chaos around him. Copy that, Hammer. I need you to mark your positions with infrared strobes so I don't hit friendlies. Can you get me exact coordinates on the target building? Jake pulled out his GPS unit and quickly read off the coordinates while bullets continued to impact around his position. He could hear one of his men returning fire with steady, controlled bursts, but they were rapidly running low on ammunition. High above the battlefield, Sarah was already lining up her attack run. She had been watching the firefight develop through her targeting systems, and she could see exactly where the enemy positions were located. Her A-10 sensors gave her a clear picture of the tactical situation, but she needed to be absolutely certain of friendly positions before she opened fire with her cannon. Strobes are active, Jake reported as his team members activated their infrared markers. We're marked with IR strobes on the east side of the compound. Target building is 50 meters west of our position. Sarah could see the strobes clearly through her night vision systems. The SEAL team was clustered near the compound's eastern wall, while heavy fire was coming from the main building to their west. She had a clear field of fire that wouldn't endanger the friendly forces. Hammer, Phoenix is inbound for gun run on the main building. Keep your heads down for 30 seconds. Jake pressed himself against the concrete barrier and shouted to his team. Incoming air support, stay low and covered. Sarah rolled her A-10 into a steep dive, lining up her targeting reticle on the building's second floor. Her 30mm GAU-8 cannon was one of the most devastating close air support weapons ever created, capable of firing depleted uranium rounds that could penetrate armored vehicles. Against the building's walls, it would be absolutely devastating. The sound of the A-10's cannon firing was unlike anything else in warfare. The distinctive brrr-t sound echoed across the valley as Sarah fired a 3-second burst directly into the building's upper floor. The explosive rounds tore through walls and windows, silencing the enemy machine gun positions that had been keeping Jake's team pinned down. Good hits, Phoenix. Enemy fire from the building has ceased. Jake could hardly believe the precision of the attack. The pilot had placed her rounds exactly where they were needed without coming anywhere close to his team's positions. But the fight wasn't over. Enemy fighters in the outbuildings and along the walls were still firing, and Jake could see movement, indicating that more Taliban fighters were moving to reinforce the compound. Phoenix, we've got more hostiles moving in from the north. Can you see them? Sarah was already scanning the area with her sensors. Affirmative, Hammer. I count at least 8 military-age males approaching your position from the north road. They're carrying weapons and moving in tactical formation. Jake realized that this was turning into a much larger engagement than anyone had anticipated. The intelligence failure was complete, and now his team was trapped in a compound surrounded by an unknown number of enemy fighters. Rodriguez, Housing, Martinez? Jake called to his team medic. He's stable, but we need to get him out of here soon. The bullet went through his shoulder but missed the major arteries. Jake made a command decision that went against every instinct he had. Phoenix, we're going to need continued close air support and immediate extraction. Can you coordinate with the helicopter assets? Already on it, Hammer. I've contacted the extraction birds and they're en route. ETA 15 minutes. I'll keep the hostiles off you until they arrive. Sarah was proving to be far more than the inexperienced pilot Jake had assumed she was. Her situational awareness was exceptional, and her ability to coordinate multiple aspects of the battle while delivering precise fire support was exactly what his team needed. Another group of enemy fighters was approaching from the west, attempting to flank the SEAL team's position. Sarah spotted them immediately and rolled in for another attack run. Hammer, you've got more hostiles approaching from your 6 o'clock. I'm engaging now. The A-10's cannon roared again as Sarah targeted the flanking force. Her rounds impacted precisely where the enemy fighters were attempting to take cover, eliminating the threat before they could get within effective range of the SEAL team. Jake was beginning to understand that he had seriously misjudged this pilot. Her call sign wasn't some flashy academy nickname. It was a mark of professional competence that she was proving with every attack run. The battle had been raging for 20 minutes, and Sarah was running low on ammunition for her 30mm cannon. She had made multiple attack runs, each one precisely targeted to eliminate enemy positions while avoiding any risk to the SEAL team below. Her fuel was also becoming a concern, but she wasn't about to abandon the ground team while they were still in danger. Jake's team had managed to secure a better defensive position in the compound's eastern section, but they were still taking sporadic fire from hidden positions. The wounded SEAL Martinez was conscious but losing blood despite the medic's best efforts to stabilize him. "Phoenix, what's your ammunition status?" Jake asked during a brief lull in the fighting. Sarah checked her weapons display. "I've got about 200 rounds left for the cannon and a full load of rockets. How many more hostiles are we looking at?" Before Jake could respond, Rodriguez spotted movement in the tree line beyond the compound. "Contact north. Large group of hostiles moving through the trees. Looks like they're trying to surround us." Sarah immediately turned her aircraft toward the new threat. Through her targeting systems, she could see at least 15 Taliban fighters moving through the sparse vegetation north of the compound. They were carrying heavy weapons, including what appeared to be an RPG launcher. "Hammer, you've got a serious problem developing. I count 15+ hostiles with heavy weapons moving to your north. They're about 200 meters out and closing." Jake's blood ran cold. His team was already outnumbered and low on ammunition. If this new group of fighters reached effective range with those heavy weapons, his SEALs would be overwhelmed. "How long until extraction arrives?" he asked. Sarah contacted the incoming helicopters on a separate frequency. "Razor flight, this is Phoenix. What's your ETA to the target area?" The response was not what anyone wanted to hear. "Phoenix, we're encountering mechanical issues with the lead bird. We're going to be delayed at least 20 minutes, maybe longer." 20 minutes. Might as well have been 20 hours under the current circumstances. Jake's team couldn't hold their position against this many attackers for that long, especially with a wounded man who needed immediate medical attention. Sarah made a split-second decision that would define her entire military career. "Hammer, I'm going to land and provide direct support until extraction arrives." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Say again, Phoenix? Did you say land?" "Affirmative. There's a flat area about 100 meters southeast of your position. I can set down there and use my aircraft systems to provide defensive fire while giving you a secure fallback position." Landing an A-10 in hostile territory was an extremely dangerous maneuver that went against every standard operating procedure. The aircraft wasn't designed for forward area operations, and if it was damaged or destroyed, Sarah would be stranded with the SEAL team. But Jake was beginning to understand that this pilot operated by a different set of rules than most. She was willing to risk her own life and her aircraft to save his team, something that went far beyond the normal expectations of close air support. "Phoenix, that's an extremely risky maneuver. Are you sure about this?" Sarah's response was immediate and confident. "I'm sure, Hammer. I can see a suitable landing area, and my aircraft can provide better defensive capability on the ground than I can from up here with limited ammunition." Jake looked around at his team's desperate situation. Martinez was getting weaker, his other men were running low on ammunition, and a superior enemy force was closing in on their position. The unconventional solution might be their only chance for survival. "Copy, Phoenix. We'll provide covering fire for your landing." Sarah began her approach immediately, using every bit of skill she had learned in years of training and combat flying. Landing an A-10 on an improvised strip under enemy fire was something that existed more in theory than practice. But she had studied the procedures and was confident in her abilities. The approaching Taliban fighters had reached the compound's outer perimeter and were beginning to probe the SEAL team's defenses. Jake could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions as the enemy force spread out to encircle their position. "Here she comes!" Rodriguez shouted as the distinctive silhouette of the A-10 appeared overhead. Sarah's approach was steep and fast, using the compound walls to mask her final descent from most of the enemy positions. The A-10's rugged design and powerful engines allowed her to execute maneuvers that would be impossible in most other aircraft. The sound of the twin turbofans was deafening as Sarah flared for landing, her main wheels touching down hard on the rough ground. She immediately applied maximum reverse thrust and brakes, bringing the heavy aircraft to a stop in less than 400 meters. "Phoenix is on the ground," she announced calmly, as if landing a fighter jet in a combat zone was something she did every day. Jake was amazed not just by the precision of her landing but by the immediate tactical advantage it provided. The A-10's massive bulk created excellent cover for his team, and Sarah could operate her remaining weapon systems with even greater precision from a stable ground position. Outstanding work, Phoenix. Move to the aircraft and take defensive positions, Jake commanded his team. The SEALs sprinted across the open ground to the relative safety of the A-10's armored hull, carrying their wounded teammate between them. Sarah had positioned her aircraft perfectly to provide maximum protection from the approaching enemy forces. Once his team was in position, Jake finally got his first close look at the pilot who had been saving their lives. Sarah Martinez was smaller than he had expected, but her movements were confident and professional as she secured her aircraft and prepared to defend their position. "Thanks for the ride, Phoenix," Jake said, as he took cover behind the A-10's landing gear. "Don't thank me yet, Hammer. We've still got to hold this position until extraction arrives." Sarah quickly shut down her engines and grabbed her survival rifle from the cockpit. The M4 carbine was standard equipment for all pilots, but she had spent countless hours training with it during her combat survival courses. She also had her sidearm and several magazines of ammunition, making her a valuable addition to the defensive perimeter. Jake was impressed by how quickly she adapted to the ground combat situation. Most pilots he had worked with were helpless once they left their cockpits, but Sarah moved with the confidence of someone who understood infantry tactics. "What's our defensive situation?" she asked as she joined the SEAL team behind her aircraft. "We've got hostiles approaching from 3 directions, Jake explained, pointing to the various enemy positions. "Martinez is wounded but stable. The rest of my team is low on ammunition but still combat effective." Sarah nodded and activated her aircraft's defensive systems from an external control panel. Even with the engines shut down, the A-10's sensors could still provide valuable intelligence about enemy movements in the area. "I can see at least 20 hostiles on my thermal imaging," she reported. "They're moving in coordinated groups, probably planning a simultaneous assault from multiple directions." The Taliban fighters had clearly recognized the threat posed by the grounded A-10 and were adapting their tactics accordingly. Sarah could see them spreading out to attack from positions where the aircraft's bulk wouldn't provide effective cover for the defenders. "Rodriguez, take Jenkins and cover our 6 o'clock, Jake ordered. "Wilson, you and Thompson watch the north approach. I'll coordinate with Phoenix on our overall defense." Sarah appreciated being included in the tactical planning. Many ground commanders would have treated her as a liability to be protected rather than a combat asset to be utilized. The first probing attack came from the north, where 3 Taliban fighters attempted to rush their position under cover of automatic weapons fire. Jake and his SEALs responded with precise, controlled bursts that stopped the attack before it could gain momentum. Sarah used her survival rifle to engage targets of opportunity, her marksmanship training proving its value in actual combat. She had always been an excellent shot, but firing at human targets who were shooting back was a completely different experience than any training scenario. "Good shooting, Phoenix," Jake commented as Sarah's rifle fire helped break up another enemy assault. The compliment meant more to her than he could possibly know. Earning the respect of an elite ground soldier like Jake was something that couldn't be achieved through training or simulation. It had to be proven under fire with lives on the line. The battle continued for another 30 minutes, with the Taliban fighters launching repeated attacks that were repelled by the combined fire of the SEAL team and their unexpected pilot reinforcement. Sarah's aircraft provided excellent cover, and her thermal imaging system gave them a crucial advantage in tracking enemy movements. But ammunition was running dangerously low for everyone. Sarah was down to her last 2 magazines, and Jake's team was rationing their remaining rounds for only the most critical targets. "Phoenix, what's the status on our extraction?" Jake asked during a brief lull in the fighting. Sarah contacted the incoming helicopters again. "Razor Flight, this is Phoenix. We desperately need immediate extraction at our position." The response was more positive this time. "Phoenix, we've resolved our mechanical issues and are inbound to your location. ETA, 8 minutes. 8 minutes seemed like an eternity under the current circumstances, but it was manageable if they could maintain their defensive positions." Sarah shared the good news with Jake, who passed it along to his team. The enemy fighters seemed to sense that time was running out for them as well. Their next attack was more determined and coordinated than the previous attempts, with fighters advancing from multiple directions simultaneously. Sarah found herself firing rapidly at targets, approaching from the east while Jake engaged threats from the north. The sound of gunfire was constant, and she could smell the acrid smoke of gunpowder mixed with the desert dust that filled the air. "I'm out," Rodriguez called from his position, holding up his empty rifle. "Same here," Wilson added from another position. Jake realized they were down to their last few magazines of ammunition. If the Taliban launched one more major assault, they might not have enough firepower to repel it. That's when Sarah made another split-second decision that demonstrated why she had earned her call sign. "Jake, I can restart my engines and use the jet blast to disrupt any ground assault. The exhaust will create a wall of superheated air that nothing can penetrate." It was an innovative tactical solution that only a pilot would think of. Jake had never heard of using jet exhaust as a defensive weapon, but under the circumstances, any advantage was worth trying. "Do it," he ordered. Sarah sprinted back to her cockpit and began the engine start sequence. The twin turbofans began, spinning up with their characteristic whine, and within 60 seconds she had both engines running at idle power. The Taliban fighters chose that moment to launch their final assault, with at least 15 men advancing on the defensive position. From multiple directions, Jake and his remaining SEALs opened fire with their last ammunition, but there were too many attackers to stop them all. Sarah advanced her throttles to full military power and turned her aircraft so that the engine exhausts faced the main group of attacking fighters. The blast of superheated air, traveling at over 400 miles per hour, created an impenetrable barrier that stopped the assault in its tracks. The roar of jet engines mixed with the distinctive sound of approaching helicopters as the extraction aircraft finally arrived on scene. Jake could see the lead helicopter flaring for landing just as Sarah shut down her engines again. "Outstanding work, Phoenix," Jake said as the rescue helicopters touched down. "I've never seen anything like that engine blast maneuver." Sarah smiled as she helped the SEALs carry their wounded teammate toward the waiting helicopter. "Sometimes you have to improvise when the situation calls for it." As they loaded Martinez into the helicopter, Jake realized that everything he had assumed about this pilot had been completely wrong. She wasn't some inexperienced academy graduate with a flashy call sign. She was a combat veteran with the skills and courage to match any warrior he had ever served with. 3 weeks later, Jake found himself walking across the same tarmac at Bagram Airfield, where Sarah had started her mission that had changed both their lives. His shoulder still ached from a minor wound he had received during the extraction, but Martinez was recovering well in a military hospital in Germany. The mission had been classified as a complete success despite the intelligence failures. Jake's team had recovered valuable documents from the compound before the firefight began, and the Taliban commander they had been hunting was confirmed killed during Sarah's initial attack runs on the building. More importantly for Jake, he had learned something valuable about making assumptions based on appearances and preconceived notions. The pilot he had dismissed as an inexperienced academy graduate had proven to be one of the most skilled and courageous warriors he had ever worked with. He found Sarah conducting a pre-flight inspection on her A-10, the same aircraft that had saved his team's lives. The maintenance crews had repaired the minor damage from small arms fire, and the plane looked ready for another combat mission. "Captain Martinez," Jake said as he approached her aircraft. Sarah looked up from her checklist and smiled. "Lieutenant Thompson, I heard your team got some well-deserved leave time." "We did. Martinez is going to make a full recovery thanks to you getting us out of there when you did." Jake paused, choosing his words carefully. "I also wanted to apologize for my comments before the mission. I made some assumptions about you that were completely wrong." Sarah set down her checklist and gave him her full attention. "What assumptions were those?" Jake felt slightly embarrassed as he recalled his initial reaction to her call sign. "I thought Phoenix was some flashy name you picked up in training. I figured you were probably inexperienced and might not be reliable when things got tough." "And now?" Sarah asked with a slight smile. "Now I know that Phoenix is exactly the right call sign for someone who can rise from impossible situations and help others do the same." Jake's respect was genuine and evident in his voice. "I've worked with a lot of pilots over the years, but I've never seen anyone with your combination of flying skill and tactical awareness. Sarah was touched by the compliment, especially coming from someone whose opinion she had come to value highly. Thank you, Jake. That means a lot coming from you. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both remembering the intensity of the battle they had shared. Combat had a way of creating bonds between warriors that were unlike any other human. Relationship. I heard through the grapevine that you're being considered for a distinguished flying cross, Jake mentioned. Sarah shrugged modestly. It's just a recommendation at this point. There are a lot of people who contribute to successful missions. Not many of them land their aircraft in hostile territory to save a SEAL team, Jake pointed out. What you did went way beyond normal. Close air support procedures. Sometimes the situation requires you to go beyond normal procedures, Sarah replied. Your team needed help, and I had the ability to provide it. The decision was pretty straightforward. Jake admired her matter-of-fact attitude about what a